Welcome, everyone, to our Special Education Legal Fund's May webinar on preparing for college, a parent's guide. We have a great webinar for you tonight with amazing panelists, and we're really excited to get started. My name is Christine Lai, and I'm the Executive Director and co-founder of Special Education Legal Fund. First of all, I'd like to, really extend a huge thank you to our corporate sponsors who make so much of what we do possible. First, I'd like to thank WealthSpire Advisors at the platinum level. At the gold level, I'd like to extend thank you to Winston Preparatory School for their support. At the silver level, I'd like to thank American School for the Deaf, our friends in West Hartford, Eagle Hill School in Greenwich, Villa Maria School in Stamford, and Fusion Academy in Westchester and Greenwich. And finally, at the bronze level, I'd like to extend a thanks to Shrub Oak International School, the Pinnacle School in Stamford, and Spire School for their support of our organization. Thank you again to this 2023 class of corporate sponsors. We really could not do what we do without your help and support. For those of you who are not familiar with us, I'd like to take a moment to introduce Special Education Legal Fund. Special Education Legal Fund was founded in 2018 to provide resources, knowledge, and support to families in need with children in the special education system. Since that time, over the past 5 years, we have provided over $600,000 in grants for legal support to over 200 families across 70 school districts in Connecticut and Westchester County, New York. This is my next announcement, is the most important announcement I'm going to make tonight, is that the month of May is our last grant cycle of the 2022-2023 school year. The Legal Assistance Program and the Advocacy Support Program, both of our parent-based grant programs, are currently accepting applications, but this is going to be the last cycle of this school year. The Legal Assistance Program, as many of you know, provides families in need with legal support of up to $5,000 from a qualified special education attorney. The Advocacy Support Program provides families in need with up to $1,000 in advocacy support from a qualified non-attorney special education advocate. And for more information on this process, or to begin the application process, please visit our website, which you'll see here below, www.spedlegalfund.org, and then click the button that says apply, and you can start the process. I lied. This is my most important announcement of the night. Sorry. I am really excited and pleased to announce the Special Education Legal Fund Resources Fair. This is something that's been really close to my heart for the last 10 years. I've wanted to bring a resources fair back to the lower Fairfield County area. And this year, in conjunction with our friends at Stanford JCC, we're going to be doing this on October 1st from 2 to 5 p.m. That's a Sunday. And really, we are very excited to welcome, a wide variety of providers, attorneys, advocates, professionals, and families to this event on the first Sunday in October. So we're really excited for that. As I said, October 1st from 2 to 5 p.m. It's going to be free for parents, families, and caregivers. Jumpstart will be providing a sensory space for children, and exhibitor tables will be available to any professionals that wish to, to take a table. Registration is going to open tomorrow on May 4th via the Eventbrite link that you use to register for this webinar and all of our webinars. And thank you again to all of our corporate sponsors that are supporting and helping us with this exciting and important project. So first, we are so pleased, sorry, as I straighten my screen, we are so pleased to welcome Marion Walsh back to our S.E.L.F. webinar series to the panel this evening. This is her second webinar, which I think makes you a regular, Marion. Marion is a distinguished special education attorney with over 20 years of experience, and her commitment to students with disabilities, particularly those challenged by mental health issues, runs deep through her professional as well as her personal life. In addition to her special education law practice, Marion has worked in many facets of education, law, and mental health as past president and trustee of the Hendrick Hudson Board of Education, as an impartial hearing officer in New York State, as a 3-time published author of books on special education law and procedure, and through her extensive volunteer work on behalf of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI. Thank you for joining us tonight, Marion.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. And I'm so excited to talk about this topic. And for all the parents there, please write down your questions and send them, I guess, into the chat, because we will have some opportunity for that. So this is congratulations, first of all, on getting this far and thinking about college, because
you know what, Marion, I'm gonna do all of the sorry, I'm gonna do all the introductions and then we'll start, if that's okay.
I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to.
No worries. I just want to get rid of my my share screen, actually. That's the most important thing this evening for me. Then I can sit back and let you all of you do the work. My next guest is a longtime friend of mine, actually. We go back to nursery school. It's about 15 years. Alessandra Long is a talented attorney based in Greenwich, Connecticut, who focuses on wills, trusts, and estates, among other matters. And she has a thriving practice in advising parents with college-age students about the documents they need to be protected and informed while their student is away at school. Alessandra is also a dedicated community advocate and philanthropist who works tirelessly on behalf of organizations like the Metro New York chapter of the American Red Cross and the Greenwich Old Timers Association. We are thrilled to welcome you, Allie.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. And last but not least, we are so pleased to welcome our final panelist, Tabitha Mancini from Winston Online. Tabitha is here tonight to talk about Winston's newest initiative, Winston In College, which is something that, as a parent of a student with learning disability, with a learning disorder who's going away to college, I think is just an amazing, amazing offering. And I'm really excited to hear more about it. Tabitha and I have known each other for a little while, and I was really excited happy to see her join the Winston family because they're so close to us, and for her to spearhead this important initiative. So welcome, Tabitha.
Thank you.
Because no webinar would be complete without a disclaimer. I am going to read my disclaimer right now for you all. This webinar panel is presented for informational purposes only. This webinar is intended as a resource for families who are navigating the special education system in Connecticut or New York, and is not intended to provide legal support, advice, or assistance to any particular individual, nor is it intended to replace the advice and counsel of a qualified special education attorney or a qualified attorney. Families in need of legal advice, support, and assistance should contact an attorney licensed to practice in Connecticut, New York, or the state of their residence to discuss the specific needs of their individual student. This webinar should not be construed as an endorsement by Special Education Legal Fund or any of its representatives of any of the participating attorneys, advocates, or other professionals in the panel, nor should it be construed as an endorsement of any school or school representative invited to appear on the panel. We are going to have questions at the end, so if you could please hold your questions, and when you enter your questions into the chat, if you could please refrain from using any identifying information about your child, including name, school district, or any other information that could be identifiable. Because not only can the panelists see the questions, but it is possible, however you put it into the chat, for other people to see it as well. So it's very important that any question that you ask be generic in nature. So here we are, preparing for college. Marion, you're on mute, sorry.
Thank you so much. I'm
Absolutely.
going to start off.
I'm so excited to chat with you this evening about this really, really important topic. I have a high school senior right now with Asperger's. And he's graduating, he's going to college, which was a very, very long road, a very exciting road for all of us. And, one of the things that I've been struggling with, as we are, in the waning weeks of senior year is what happens, what changes after a child graduates is in their post-secondary life and in college.
Yes. That is such a good question. And none of this is intuitive, and there's such an adjustment period, but there are important legal changes that every parent needs to know about, especially parents of children who have been identified with disabilities. So what changes? There is going to be a new eligibility criteria for services if your child does need services or accommodations in college. There's not going to be oversight from the PPT or the IEP team. There's no more IEP in college. That ends when a student graduates from high school or turns 21 or 22, depending on the state. There is going to be self-direction by the student, self-advocacy. The parent is not the primary advocate anymore. The student is the advocate. And that takes a lot of preparation. If the student is not ready, it's time to start preparing. So, so it does go, there's no, like I said, no more IEP, but there can be a 504 plan in college, and it may or may not be written. And importantly, once the student is 18, which is the age of majority in New York, parents are no longer part of the process if the student does not want to include them. They can be apprised of progress if the student chooses to include them again. And there are some exceptions to that with the right consents. But again, even if you're paying the tuition, you don't have an absolute right to get records or get progress reports. And the last important legal change to know is that post-secondary education is not an entitlement like a public education. You know, you have a right to a public education, you have a right to a free, appropriate public education as a child with a disability, but that is not true in college. So, so that is very important to know.
What kind of, I mean, can you talk about like the types of accommodations that, you know, a student that might be available to a student? And obviously that is dependent on what their individual needs are. But, you know, I think most people, when they think about accommodations, they think about accommodations in the classroom, you know, academic accommodations, but there's kind of a whole world around that. And also there's other accommodations. So, you know, I'd love it if you could talk a little bit about, you know, what those entail.
Sure. So it's important to see them through the lens of what's legally required. And a post-secondary school or a college, and most of them are going to be receiving federal funds, so they will be required to provide reasonable accommodations that are necessary to ensure they're not discriminating on the basis of disability. So they're not required to provide affirmative services, but they are required to give certain reasonable accommodations. So I will talk a little bit about what some of the accommodations we've seen, and there is a process for how to get the accommodations. It's not a simple process, and I mean, it is, you have to go through the Office of Disability Services or Access Services. Each college has a different name for it, and you're going to have to provide documentation, but we can talk about that a little later.
Yeah, absolutely.
But some of the accommodations we have seen, and they aren't going to be they aren't going to be nearly as significant as they were in high school. You know, just some examples. Extended time for testing is common. Extended time for getting in assignments. You know, possibly reducing a course load, substituting a course for another, providing note takers at times, but sometimes the college is not going to pay for that. That could be an accommodation. It could be a student who's doing it. There could be recording devices. It's going to really depend on the disability, though. Some students say with significant needs, for example, with autism, who may have difficulty with need supervision, may need a personal attendant, and that would be an accommodation, but it would be an accommodation to allow an attendant, not to provide the attendant.
One, right?
So that would be a private expense.
That would be something that the university would allow, but the parents would have to pay for.
Yes, and then for students with visual impairments, there can be all kinds of accommodations. You know, equipping school computers with screen reading, voice recognition, adaptive software. Similarly, for students with hearing impairments, there could be interpreters. There's an endless list depending on the disability, but talking about a student, say, with a learning disability, or say an anxiety disorder, mental health condition, it's likely that the accommodations could be as mostly it's going to be extended time. The parents can ask for notification, for example, that a student's not in class, if the student consents, and that, because that is a major sign, and that happens so frequently with students with depression and anxiety in college. You may not even have mental health conditions going into college, but unfortunately, during the college years, many mental health conditions emerge, or the stress leads to.
That's a new one. I didn't know about that one. The notification for, you know, for if the student is not in class. That's I think that's an
some of the colleges won't agree, but it can be critical, because that can be the only sign that you have that something is wrong. And then it gets to be the end of the semester, and all of a sudden you realize your student has not been going to class all semester, and there's no way.
And it's too late to do anything about it.
Yeah, it's going to be too late. The other thing some students I've worked with have asked for you could ask for attendance modifications. For example, a student, if they know they have depression that's cyclical, they may say to the professor, there are some days I just can't get out of bed. This takes a lot of self-knowledge and self-advocacy. That's what I mean. A lot of students aren't at that point.
Yeah.
You have to say that to each professor. It's not as simple as just saying to one, but the Office of Disability Services can help. But the student may say, Professor Jones, I cannot get to class every day. I'm not being lazy. I care about my assignments. Just so you know, may I please, and I have this accommodation on my 504. So please, I will make up the assignments. I know I'm responsible for the work, but so that's just
yeah.
another. So there's almost an endless list, but
can you talk a little bit about that process in because you've talked a little bit about advocacy, about the student being the advocate for, for themselves in this process. Can you break down how that happens, first in the interaction with the ODA and getting the accommodations themselves, and then the process of interacting when you're in college, and really and affirmatively asserting your accommodations. I think that would be a really interesting thing to talk about.
Yes, and it's so important, and this is why I'm going backwards. It's so important for students to be part of their IEP process or 504 process during high school, because it takes time to develop these skills. And I know some students don't want to be, but if they've been at meetings, say their junior, senior year, they will understand the process a little bit and learn a little bit how to be a self-advocate. So a student does have to apply for accommodations with their college accessibility office. It's not automatic. There's no requirement that a college reach out to you. Do you have disabilities? Unlike high school, unlike school districts, there's a child find obligation. Yeah, so they do not. There's no obligation on that. So the student has to apply. You do have to have documentation. And in order to qualify as disabled under Section 504 of the ADA, you must have, it's really the 504 standard. You have to have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. It could be ADHD, it could be an anxiety disorder, it could be a hearing impairment, it could be autism. There's endless list. There's not any required list, unlike the IDA. You could have a record of the impairment, or you are perceived as having such an impairment. But usually if the student has a past IEP, a past 504, that could be sufficient. We always recommend for students to have an evaluation or some kind of neuropsych, maybe not a full neuropsych, but at least some cognitive testing if they're, and the senior year. So the college is going to want something that's based on adult testing, the WAIS, not the WISC, that's the adult scale. And they will want it in the past 3 years for those accommodations. And if it's a mental health condition or a medical condition, they may not need that. If it's it could be a complex medical condition, such as a chronic health condition, and then if it's a mental health condition, you may not need the full cognitive testing. But it's much better to have it, because there could be things that the college notices, such as different discrepancies between processing speed and verbal IQ, which could be important for them to know as well.
Now, I mean, as someone who's going through this, right now, do all colleges require, sort of the same kind of documentation, or is it, or does it vary, or, how does that, like some might require testing, some might require something else. I mean, what does that sort of look like?
Yeah. So under the law, it has to be a documented physical or mental health impairment. And if it's an invisible disability, they're going to need some documentation. So the colleges may have different set requirements on what tests they require, but in general, they're going to need some documentation. Right. And unlike high school, unlike the public school system where the school has to pay for it, if the school has to do evaluations under the IDA in high school. The college does not have to pay for it. You have to bring that testing to them. Right. And you can get it through insurance. It doesn't have to be perfect testing, but they will, or it could be a doctor's note. So you will need some documentation, but the process it's going to be the same, essentially, that there's going to have to be medical, or it could be a psychologist who's making this recommendation. And it will have to be valid and reliable, but there isn't usually there could be slight variations on what testing, and it may depend on the type of disability as noted, because if it's a learning disability, they're going to need to see the actual the testing. If it's a mental health, they may not. If it's autism, they will probably just need to see the record and may not need that full testing or the diagnosis.
I will say that having been through, all aspects of the special education system, I'm finding this equally as confusing and difficult as I found earlier phases of my experience. So
Yeah.
I think it's really important. I mean, I guess my advice to parents, who are going through this process, just from a parent's perspective, is, if your child is interested in a certain school, start looking at what level of support they provide, really even before your child is applying there,
Oh,
because
yeah.
that can definitely guide like where
Mhm.
you think your child would be, more comfortable or happy or whatever. And I, and that process alone helped me learn about, what was available and what was, and what's possible. This, I feel like we talked a lot about you know, the classroom academic
Mhm.
accommodations. Are there other accommodations that are available to students with disabilities, housing wise, kind of dining wise,
Mhm.
like that kind of thing?
Yes, I mean,
My
I
son can
think
apply for an emotional support animal. I mean, he doesn't want to, but that's another thing that I've seen as well.
absolutely, yes, and there's a wonderful speaker, Habden Burma. She's deafblind and she is amazing. She talks about what accommodation she needed in college. I think she was out in Portland, and she's first deafblind woman to go to Harvard Law School, and she is incredible and
Amazing.
talks about how the college did not think she needed these accommodations, that they were trying to give her the minimal. And she said, no, this is not a request, it's a right. So
Mm.
she needed, certain devices to be able to translate speech. She needed, obviously her support dog to help her with through navigate the classroom. She
Mhm.
needed significant support, and she did receive it, but it took a lot of advocacy. So really, there's not a limit on what you can ask for. It's just
Mhm.
going to be, it has to be reasonable. It cannot change the full nature of the program. So for example, you can't, if you're you're not going to be able to have the work modified. You're not going to be able to
Right.
have less papers, maybe
Right.
one less paper, but not, you have to meet college standards.
Right.
The colleges are pretty set on that. So there's, and in housing, it could be anything, like you said, the emotional support animal. It could be, is almost an infinite, of course, it could be physical limitation, physical
Mhm.
barriers are
Right. Right.
eliminated. So
Like
it's
first
really an
floor
infinite.
building with an elevator, that kind of thing,
Yes, exactly.
Mhm.
So that, and it's important to make that request as early as possible, after you're accepted, of course, but there are going to be deadlines, and you have to do it each semester, not just once. So the student has to do it. And if
Mhm.
the student says upon going to college, I don't need accommodations, I've had some clients do this, I'm fine now, I had my IEP, I'm done. And then they later need them, they can still apply, but that
Mhm.
gets to be a very frustrating process, because it usually happens that then they decide to apply after they haven't gone to class all
Right.
semester,
Right. Like
then
there's
it's
already been a
harder.
level of,
Yeah.
lack of
Mhm.
success, for
Yeah.
one.
So it's really, again, it's so student initiated, and it may take, parents need to realize there's
Mhm.
no guarantee on any of this.
Yeah.
Get tuition insurance. That is my other best advice, um, because there's no guarantee in any of this. And especially when COVID times, college is very difficult, and there's a lot of dysregulation and a lot of adjustment. And so, but the tuition insurance is critical, because
Mhm.
this way you can apply to get
Mhm.
get a refund. So just that's true for
Student. Yeah, absolutely.
every student. And I just wanted to mention about not just accommodations, but not just for every student in a college, there's significant services. And now I'm not just talking about student with disabilities, but there's math lab, writing center,
Yeah.
career services, office hours of professors, academic advising, health services, the library, counseling services. So that's all, student has to access it. So again, that's up to the student, but it's really important to to tell
To
the
know
student
that
that,
they're there and to be
to know
willing
that they're
to
there. Yeah.
access that support. Some colleges will offer like executive functioning help, sort
Mm-hmm.
of like coaches or classes,
Yeah.
kind of adulting type things. And that's, something that, is really, can be really valuable, especially
Yeah.
if you kind of lay it out in the, in the initial days, so they know that it's there and are comfortable reaching out for it.
Yes.
That's great. Marion, do you have anything else you want to kind of wrap up with as we
Yeah.
sort of end our
Yes.
discussion on
I
accommodations?
Yeah, especially because it's May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and right now, we do have a crisis with youth and mental health. It's known, and I do this work with NAMI, but college especially is a very difficult time. And even if your student does not have a mental health disability going into college, it can develop, because it's that time when a lot of mental health disabilities do develop, and there's also a lot of stress. So it's very important to talk to your child about mental health needs, and the campus should do this too. But again, they're only doing access. So I would make sure that you do talk to your child, whether they have say an anxiety disorder or depression. It's even more important. But if it develops, make sure they know about the counseling services. And most colleges, a lot of colleges now do offer counseling just as part of the tuition. Speak to your child about mental health services. They should know what to do if they become overwhelmed. There's no stigma in seeking help. There's a NAMI mental health college guide that's very helpful. And you should, even talking about what to do if your child feels like they're going to hurt themselves or feels that overwhelmed, how to call 911, because it's better to talk about it than not talk about it. And there's a lot of research that says that if you talk about even suicide, you're lessening stigma, and it's you're making it more out in the open. And if you think your child is at risk during college, what I do, you can text or advise clients to, just make sure you set a daily communication plan. You can alert the professors, you can alert their advisor. And if it's an emergency situation, they will be able to speak to you. And most colleges at this point will speak to parents. But it is, remember that suicide is the second leading cause of death in the US for people ages 10 to 24. So it's, and rates have even increased with COVID. So, and it's very difficult, because if the college model does not work, because if a student's depressed, the last thing they can often do is self-identify and seek help, and that's what the colleges require. So it's it's a process, but there are processes like medical withdrawals and things. So there are always options, and that's the most important thing to tell students. If you feel overwhelmed, you can always come home. Don't we want you to succeed, we support you, whatever you need, we're here. But that's important, I think.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Marion. Moving, I think that's actually a nice segue into our next panelist, Alessandra Long. Al, I've got a high school senior, as you know, leaving for college in another state in the fall. What do I need to do? I mean, what should I do to prepare?
Well, there is a lot you need to do. Clearly.
Of course.
But yeah, and leaving and going to another state is always a little unsettling. But, know that, whether they're going to college in state or out of state, but, no longer under your roof. That there are different, things that you're going to have to consider, and what you're comfortable with in keeping tabs on your child, and also being able to continue to make decisions for your child or assist them with decisions that they need to make. And then, of course, there's, the crises, situations that may come up. And when they're in another state, if they're far away, or even if they're only an hour or two away, it's very important to have certain legal documents in place. So that's the first, and foremost thing I always tell my clients, because that's something that you can do ahead of time. Because as soon as they turn 18, you are no longer going to be granted the access, and that access to medical records and to report cards and to anything that's personal to them is no longer going to be your purview after 17 years and 364 days. It's going to be your child's. And unless that child gives you permission to certain information about them, legally, you're not entitled to it. So, whether, and all states have different laws and different types of documents, but for the most part, they're very similar. And,
well, let's talk about two, like, not to be, the harbinger of doom, but let's talk about like two potential, crises. When I think of, what are the things that can happen? One is a medical crisis. So like, let's talk about the medical crisis and, and how a parent can prepare themselves to help their child navigate that.
Yeah.
or healthcare
So,
crisis.
I mean, I think, healthcare and a medical crisis, the two documents, and sometimes in some states it requires three documents, is a healthcare proxy, a living will, and a authorization of medical records. So a healthcare proxy, living will can sometimes be called a healthcare directive, which means maybe the two of them are together. So depending upon what state you live in, in Connecticut, in Connecticut, I'm licensed in Connecticut and New York. So I'll take those examples, right? In Connecticut, you can have one healthcare proxy, and it can have the living will and the healthcare decisions in the one document. Whereas in New York, a living will can be a separate document, and the healthcare proxy is its own standalone document. So that document, once your child turns 18, they can sign, and also an authorization of medical records, which is basically just a blanket HIPAA release. Okay, so when you go to the doctor, you have to sign each individual
You're
HIPAA
authorized to
release.
release this to my doctor.
Right, exactly. So that way that you can release medical records, and if your child doesn't want to be saddled with, if they have to see different doctors and healthcare services at their university or at their college with getting those medical records themselves, and they want mom to still do it or dad to do it or whoever their caregiver is, then they need to sign an authorization of medical records so that you can continue to represent them. And that doesn't require them to be,
Disabled,
in a crisis situation or in a coma or, in one of these, dire crisis situations. And, it's even so simple as, like, I had a friend who is also a client whose son was at the Naval Academy, and he was having awful pains, and the nurses would not speak to her on the phone initially because they were like, no, your son's 18, and we need to get permission from him before we can tell you anything. And first of all, luckily he was conscious and could give them permission, but they didn't give, funny enough, her any information until she said to them, I can screenshot the healthcare proxy of my son, the authorization of medical records and living will, and send it to you right now. So, because he was in with the doctors,
right, so he
and the
couldn't give them
nurses
permission.
were she was calling the nurses. So it's very important to get these documents in place. And the healthcare proxy in and of itself allows someone else, whoever it may be, to make medical decisions on your behalf or your student's behalf. And, if they can't make them for themselves. So that's the most important thing. And I think that, short of getting on an airplane or taking an 8-hour drive and being a nervous wreck, you can usually avoid that situation by having that document, so that then you can talk to the nurses, the mental health providers, the doctors, without having to stress about it. And like I said, at the healthcare, when you do enroll your child in college, a lot of this stuff is, a lot of the paperwork, everything's on a portal, everything's going to go to the child, right? For the most part. And there's going to be opportunity for the student to give you access to certain things, and anything that you could have access to that they can click on a button or sign a form at the school, they should, is my advice. Because it will make your life easier, their life easier. The living will is also a portion of the healthcare proxy, and that is obviously the document which states that if you're in a terminal condition, you don't want extra,
extraordinary measures apply.
Yes, extraordinary measures. And, and that's something that I have to say when I meet with students, sometimes at 18 years old, they're not they don't want to sign a living will, because they're like, I want to be kept on, whatever. So this is but you know, and I'm not saying one decision is right over the other.
Mhm,
I'm just saying that these are the discussions that you need to have. And
mhm,
by getting these certain healthcare documents in place, it also gives you as a parent an opportunity to have these discussions with your child, which you
mhm,
may not have had.
mhm.
And it's a it's a bonding moment, it's an educating moment, and it's also an opportunity to understand their morals and values
Right,
in this arena of
right.
healthcare, right? And to see what their wishes are. So I think that that's really important.
I mean, I think that you touched on an interesting, an interesting point, and and Marion has touched on it as well. Is the importance of the child being involved. I mean, I shouldn't say child anymore. They're technically 18. The student being involved in this process. And have you had experience with your clients where they were not agreeable about this type of thing? I mean, Marion had touched on a little in her
Yes.
discussion, where the student's like, well, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I'm going to take care of it myself kind of thing. What do you
Yeah.
do in that situation as an
Well,
attorney and as a parent?
funny enough, I did have, and this was actually last summer. And I have a client who has 4 children.
Hmm.
And one of the children, and they were all relatively, you know, one came first, and then this was the second child doing the documents. And then actually she has 5 children, then she has triplets.
Oh,
So,
wow. Okay.
but the second to oldest child, um, does have some, disabilities. And she really did not want, and I know we didn't talk about this document yet, but she was okay with the healthcare directives
Hmm.
and anything related to healthcare, but she was not okay with the durable power of attorney.
Oh, yes, we have not gotten to durable power of
Yes,
attorney.
which we
Okay.
haven't talked about.
Right.
So, that was one issue with not wanting to, and we, and I'll talk about that more later when we
Right.
touch on that. But also she had a problem with the living will part.
Hmm.
So she just felt that she did not, even if she was in a terminal condition, that she wanted anything and everything, extraordinary measures administered, and that she was going to leave that decision to doctors and to her parents to ultimately make.
Hmm.
And that she wanted to stay on the machines as long as possible,
Hmm.
and if it had to play out in the courts someday, then it would. Um, but she's entitled to make that decision,
Hmm.
right? So it's good to try to empower them, right? And also to have them understand, and then also let them know that they could come back and do this another time
Later.
if
Yeah.
they're not comfortable and
Yeah.
they want to do more research or have
Yeah.
some more discussion. So, I try to definitely educate
Hmm.
my students as
Right.
much as possible. And then also let them realize that they can change it at any
Hmm.
point in time.
Hmm. Let's talk a little bit about the durable power of attorney in the context of, we've talked about sort of a medical, healthcare emergency. What about another type of emergency? A legal issue, some
Right.
kind of, legal issue.
Yeah, so the durable power of attorney I call it the business document, right?
Mhm.
It basically allows someone to be handling your business matters if you can't handle them yourself,
Mhm.
right? For whatever reason. So your taxes, your, leases,
Mhm.
um, car insurance,
Mhm.
bank accounts, anything that requires your signature as an adult.
Mhm.
And if you are the sole person on that account or on that car insurance or on that lease, it allows, someone else to take care of that matter for you if you can't take care of it for yourself.
Mhm.
And, possibly, you could be getting in a car accident, right? And, you need your parent to be signing off on some type of insurance for you, or towing, or dealing with a police officer, or whatever the case may be, because you've gotten into a car accident and you're dealing with the actual car, right? Not your health per
Right.
se,
But what,
but
yeah.
the actual car. Or you've gotten into a lease situation, right? Maybe your parents didn't co-sign the lease. A lot of the leases, when kids go off campus and start signing leases for second year or third year, you know, in college, they just require the kids to sign the lease. So in order for you to step in, if there is an issue with the landlord, you really need a power of attorney to be able to step in.
Right.
And step into the shoes of your child. So I think it's really important in that regard. Also, if they're away and they're studying abroad, let's say, and you have to deal with filing their taxes, and, I mean, a lot of things are DocuSign right now and what have you, but if there are things that you need to do at home from a perspective, a business perspective, it makes it so much easier if you have a power of attorney that allows you to do that. And I think the kids would appreciate it. And you can limit the power of attorney. I mean, you can do a standard power of attorney. You can do one with that gives you more powers, than, which in the special needs arena, which I'll leave all of that discussion mostly to Marion, but you can make a durable a power of attorney that has additional powers that will enable you to handle whatever you need to handle for your student.
Can you talk a little bit about, I already know your answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. There's a lot of online resources that allow you to, fill out a, healthcare proxy, or, durable power of attorney or living will. Can you talk about the, what the, kind of, what the positives and negatives of that type of arrangement?
I would say the only positive to it is that it's cheap.
Yeah.
Yes, it's cheap. And, I think that's the only positive. And maybe you can do it from your home, right? You can do it, the convenience of just going on your computer and doing it. But I think what people don't appreciate is first of all, the magnitude of what these documents do, right? And you don't want to be filling them out the wrong way and without legal assistance from an attorney who you trust, not somebody who is just, a chat
Someone on
room
the internet,
or, something like that, a chat box.
And as you said, the states are different.
And the states are different. Exactly. Yeah. However, like I tell my clients, like a lot, obviously, of students live in one state as their permanent home, right? Like your son, right? He's going to be going to another state to go to college. Now, the most frequently asked question is, what do I do? Do I have to do documents for both states? Well, in most cases, you do not.
Okay.
If you're going to, obviously to school in the United States, each state should recognize the documents of the other state if they're fully executed and they're executed properly, right? So, and because your permanent residence is your domicile, right? Your child should, in your situation, like if you live in Connecticut, then the Connecticut documents should be sufficient. I do tell clients though, and some attorneys may disagree with me, listen, if money is not an issue and it makes you feel better to do the documents in the state of their college, then you're more than welcome to do that. And sometimes I'm also licensed in California, and California's documents are very different from New York and Connecticut. New York and Connecticut and,
New
some
Jersey, kind of,
yeah.
yeah.
So, and I've never had a problem with one of my students that goes to school in California using Connecticut or New York documents.
Mhm.
But I will say I have done a handful of California documents so that if they get ill in California or they have a legal issue in California,
Mhm.
they'll use those. If it happens anywhere else, then they'll use their Connecticut or their New York ones. So I think it's, important to do what makes you feel better.
Sure.
And I really don't trust the online resources. I've
Mhm.
seen them, I've looked at them. I've had people come to me like, oh, I did this online. Can you look at it? And should we do something else? And I'm like, 9 times out of 10,
Mhm.
we do something else.
Right.
If it is sufficient, then I'll tell you it's sufficient, but I think you should get a legal opinion as
Mhm.
far as that.
Right. Right. Perfect. My last question for you is, you're, obviously the parent of a student, at UVA.
Yes.
Obviously you also have another, child that's, a professional dancer in another state, but, still your child,
Texas.
um, what tips do you have for parents who are sending, a child off to college for the first time?
Well, I would say I think one of the most important things for me personally, and I'm putting my mother hat on,
Mhm.
is Life 360. I think Life 360, if your kids are on it now, if
Mhm.
they're, one of those tracking apps, and I tell parents, don't comment where they are, but you want to know that they're
Right,
safe.
right,
You
right,
want to know that
right,
they're safe, and
right.
you want to know, I think, where they are generally,
Mhm.
and are they on campus? Are
Right.
they here?
Have
Are
they
they there?
not left their room for 4 days kind of
Right,
thing?
exactly. Or, is the car in a gutter somewhere? You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, you want to know where they are, if they're
Mhm.
getting in an Uber, So I think that there are certain things that parents, when they go off to college, like your kids should, also have an Uber app, because in an
Mhm.
emergency, if they have to call an Uber and have it attached to your credit card, you want them to be able to do that.
Right,
Right now, a
right.
lot of campuses have different transportation numbers and
Mhm.
different apps and things that they could call for free
Right,
transportation.
right.
And that is always an option. So, and the other big thing is, when you're going to a college, and you can do this before your child gets there, is there's a lot of like Facebook parent groups,
Mhm.
which give a lot of good advice as to other Facebook parent groups to join for
Mhm.
that particular school, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And also, the school, there's different, school Instagrams,
Mhm.
and you can sign up for alerts from the school when there are emergency alerts. Unfortunately, my son was involved in, there was a shooting at UVA this fall, and, you know, the parents were informed of it first and foremost with the students, because
Mhm.
we were all on the emergency app.
Gotcha.
And so you can, I think that that's an important thing. And I also think that you have to think about also just the basic things, like your kid should have their insurance card with
Mhm.
them.
Yeah.
If they have a driver's license, they should have a driver's license. If they don't have a driver's license, they should have some other form of
Right.
ID, whether it's a
That other
copy.
ID, the other
Yes,
ID, yeah.
the other ID, exactly. They should have a debit or a
Mhm.
credit card, depending upon what you and your family want to do and what limits you want to, because they're going to need money to go places and do things. Those are some of the things that I think, are important.
Mhm.
And I think that, clearly you should have a copy of their license or their other ID. If you
Mhm.
don't,
Right, right.
keep a copy of it. And those are the things that pretty much stand out to me. Um,
Perfect. I
you
mean,
know,
obviously that is extremely helpful. I love Live 360 already, even though we are not on it yet. But we have plans to put that in place shortly, and then put it on place on the other one, so that he's used to it by the time he's
Yeah.
ready to go away to
I
school.
think it's important, Christine.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, I
if you,
do.
if you get used to it while you're home, then it's not an issue. And then also you can manage what you get alerted. Like
Right.
if you just want to get alerted when they're leaving their dorm, when they're here, and you can put the different, like you could
Right.
put where their classroom is, where the library is, where the fraternity house is, and where the apartment is. So you're not getting dinged all the time. You just
Right.
kind of know
Right.
where they
Right.
are.
And once
Generally.
you get used to kind of what their schedule is and what the general flow is going to be, that is super, super helpful. Thank you so much, Allie. We will take questions on this at the end of our presentation. And our
Sure.
final presenter this evening is Tabitha Mancini from Winston In College. And I'm really excited to have Tabitha talk about our next topic, which is, we've done all this hard work. We have researched the college for fit. We have explored the accommodations. We have talked to ODA, the Office of Disability Accommodations, and we have, gotten our student, prepared to, access all those things. And our student is still struggling. They are struggling with getting assignments done, advocating with their professor. It's still a struggle. So, can you talk broadly about Winston In College and what that program does to support college students?
Sure. I feel like I do need to state either a warning or disclosure. A parent of a adult child with dyslexia, and so going through the IEP process, very familiar as a parent. But I also was a director of a disability services department at the university level in my past, and also teach at the graduate level for the University of Connecticut on this topic on disability services.
Fabulous.
in higher ed. So when I hear these conversations, so much great information, and I think it ties in nicely to what I'm going to talk about. So Winston In College is under the umbrella of Winston Online, which Winston Online is the online campus for Winston Prep. And what we do in Winston College is we offer academic and social skill support for college students with LDs, executive function challenges, and NVLD. So we do this using the Winston Prep teaching and program models. And one of those programs that we do, it's a pillar of Winston education. It's our focus program. But so what we have done is we've taken our focus program, but we apply it in a college context to meet the needs of a student in this new context, and supporting them as they navigate it. It's interesting because, all of a sudden they're an adult. It's like this magical door that they walk through.
Right.
And they're supposed to know
They're an
how to
adult. That's what it says on the
Right.
documents.
Right. They're an emerging adult, but the expectation is that they're adult and they know,
And they can turn on a
how to-
switch and do everything.
They can you just
Right.
walk through that door and there they are, they're independent. And it's interesting because when we think about just maturation of, executive function, executive function is something that's developed over time. So, it develops well into late 20s and 30s too. So I think that people either don't realize that or also, forget that.
Mhm.
Perfect.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm familiar as a former Winston parent with the focus program and the focus instructor. For our audience who might not be as familiar, the focus instructor and the Winston program is sort of, what I would call the, kind of the general contractor of the students program. They communicate with the family. They communicate with the teachers. They work on a weekly or daily basis with the child on whatever their challenges happen to be. So, if it's a reading issue, it's, we work on reading. If it is a social issue, then there's a social group that's facilitated by the focus teacher. So those are sort of the different layers that I'm personally experienced with in the focus program. Can you talk a little bit about how that translates to on a college basis, like what it looks like, because obviously you're providing it online and you are providing, a level of support on a weekly basis. Can you kind of talk about how that works, that works in practice?
Sure. So it's a great way to explain the focus instructor. So I might use that in the future. So if it pops up somewhere, you see it. There you go.
Perfect. Steal
That's right. So it is our focus program. They have a focus instructor, which is daily one-to-one support, and we focus on skill acquisition. So the focus instructor is really the person who is driving that student's education, and they're setting their goals and prioritizing goals. So we deeply understand the student. We plan interventions and what approaches that we're going to use. We are not kind of steeped into one approach, but we draw from many. And then we put into place a plan and approach, and we're always monitoring that and changing as needed. We also, in addition to looking at the students' academic skills, we're also looking very much at their social emotional skills. So our goal is that they become sustainable and independent learners for their lifetime, and not simply to pass the class, right? So some of these skills go beyond reading, writing, and math, and critical thinking. Some are, definitely self-regulation, reflection, advocacy, which
How
I
to
think
give
is always
positive feedback.
That's
negative
right.
feedback positively.
Right. And so
Right.
we've identified 8 distinct domains that a student should have and develop. And we call those the qualities of the sustainable and independent learner, the QSIL. And there's a reason why I want to make sure to mention that as well, because we've identified that those skills are also extremely important, not only to academic success, but to life success, and a student feeling or person feeling enjoyment from their life.
For sure.
So now when they're in college, the relationship really changes, right? Because the students in the driver's seat, they're now responsible. The expectation is the student drive all processes and also identify themselves, as was talked about earlier, very, very different model. And so how we interact with the student is a little bit different. We're still the expert, but we really partner with the student, and we become, a deep partner with them, understanding them and working with them to decide what their goals are after we understand their cognitive profile and them as a learner. And that can change, as well. So we might decide with the student that, some of the things that we might decide depending, it all depends. It's always case by case, and it's,
so
it all depends.
that sort of seems to imply, that, the program is to some extent or to a large extent customizable. So
completely.
Obviously it is, driven by what the student needs. So, if you are in the middle of the year and you realize like, oh, wait, I need we might need some more support. Can you bring someone on mid-year in sort of a rolling kind of format? Or are you like, fall semester, winter semester, beginning of the year kind of start dates? How does that work?
We do, it is based on semester, but we can prorate. And if somebody does find is very common that students are, oh, I've received accommodations my entire life. I made it to college. I made it this far. I got this, right? So all of the different learning curves that have been mentioned so far, student finds themselves in that situation, we can certainly step in and help them. So I wanted to make a point also is that some of the example skills that we might be working on is maybe writing, critical thinking, also executive function skills, and some of those Q-SIL domains like self-reflection, self-regulation as well. So while, I think it's important to remember that we are skill-based. So we use the content.
Right. You're not doing homework. You're not doing homework.
Right. So we might be helping, a student with their sociology class or their stats class or something, but we've established what goals and skills that we want to develop in that student. And so we're
through the lens of the work.
Exactly. So we are helping with the subject matter.
Right.
In addition.
Where do the instructors come from and how does that kind of matching process work? Because I would imagine that it is, it's complicated, trying to get the right fit.
Yeah, so all our focus teachers are Winston trained focus instructors, and they're chosen to suit the needs of each student that they're being paired with. So as an example, we might have be working with a student who has a diagnosis of NVLD and has difficult time with kind of big picture reasoning and executive function skills. So we would pair them with a focus instructor who has particular experience working with that learning profile. And our faculty and focus instructors have a variety of specialization. And they also, the Winston Innovation Lab is our kind of research arm of what we do, and they're responsible for teacher development and leadership programming as well. So there's a wide breadth and depth to what we do in training and teacher preparation.
Do you stay with that? If your student is, has a good relationship with that, with that focus instructor, what's sort of the the end game of the focus of the Winston in College? Is it to provide, support all the way through college? Is it, are you looking to, like a 2-year kind of fading type of thing? How is that structured?
Yeah, I think it just really depends on the student, right? And so the program they're in and where they're in, what they're doing. So it's also a student might start, they might take a break, they might, pick up again. It really just depends on where that student is and in their development and what their goals are. And, when we're talking about cognitive processes, right, that context really matters. So students may start, say, in their first year, be fine after that, and then all of a sudden they get in grad school and it changes again. The context and also the type of work really changes again. So they might pick up. So there, I can really give lots of examples of why, but it's very, very flexible, just depending on what the student's goals are.
Right. And so, and when you are thinking about how this, and this is sort of my final question, how the program is structured, the focus teacher is checking in with the student or having a work session with the student on, twice a week, 3 times a week. What's sort of the structure that, that you're working with?
It's very flexible. Typically what we do is start with either 2 days a week or 3 days a week. Really just depends on the student. And we can help the student and the family decide, what they might want to start with. And then it can be adjusted.
Right. And in theory, you can fade that over time. You'd start with the 3 and then go to the 2 and then 1 and then, hopefully 0, kind of thing, over time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Tabitha, for sharing that. I'm really excited. I have Winston in my back pocket as always. So I'm really, really excited to hear about that, about that program. So we have a couple of questions in the Q&A. There's a couple questions actually about FERPA. What about having a FERPA form? Do you need one or not for college? The school says that that we don't have to, that the student doesn't have to share Marion, can you talk a little bit about FERPA? I'm just picking on you.
Sure,
It's been a
of
while since
course.
we talked.
Yes, no, that's fine. So even if you have, what Ali talked about, the advanced directives, you have your power of attorney, which could cover FERPA. The college is going to want you to sign, the student to sign their own FERPA form.
Mhm.
Each college will have generally their own form.
Yeah.
If they don't sign it, you still have the other forms, you can still use them, but they're going to want their own form.
Mhm.
And just remember, even if the student signs the form, if you call the dean and say the student's having a meeting and you want to participate and the student says, no, I don't want my parents to meet, they will respect the student's wishes. So just
Okay.
keep that in mind.
Okay.
However, there is an exception to FERPA the parents should know about. If the
Mhm.
student is a financial dependent, then the colleges may share information. It says
Mhm.
they may share, it doesn't say they have to share. So but you should point that out. It's right in the regulations that
Mhm.
and most students in college are
Are
financial
financial
dependent.
dependent, right?
Because it gets to the point of absurdity when you're paying, what
The
is it?
tuition,
You're
right?
paying
Like a
$80,000 a
huge
year.
amount of money, and
Yes,
yeah, and yet you have
and
no,
and you have no say, even on the bill. And if you call and say, I'm trying to pay the bill, oh, I'm sorry, we can't talk to you. But usually
Right.
that gets to the point. If
Right.
you
No,
talk to
they
someone,
want the bill, so they
yeah.
want the bill paid, so that's okay. They're
Yeah.
okay with that.
But not always. You'd be surprised because they
Mm.
might have a question. If you have a question about financial aid, they may not
Right.
answer it. So yeah, so there is a FERPA form that the colleges will want signed, and you do need that signed, but it's not a guarantee. And if your child changes their mind, they can, they can
Okay.
say no. So it's tough.
What if you I've got a couple questions here about how are colleges held accountable, and what are the potential recourse or consequences, like if there are promised accommodations and they're not delivered. For example, a note taker not being sufficient, or the technology being unsuccessful. What what recourse does a parent student have?
So there's a few recourses, a few ways. Each college will have their own grievance process.
Mhm.
So you should look at that, and the student should make a grievance if there's any kind of accommodation not delivered. Now, there's also the Office for Civil Rights. You can make a complaint. It's a very long process. It can take a year. It's very backlogged. And often, there's not really there's not accountability in the sense that they're going to change the student's grade, no likelihood, except if there's a very clear error. But
Right.
Remember, this is access to accommodations. The
Right.
college is not giving you accommodations. So it's up to the student to access them, and everything is on the student. And you know how hard that is.
Yeah.
Because if a professor doesn't do it, and I've heard professors not do it, I've seen, but again, it's all access. So
Yeah.
it's all going to be a question of what was reasonable, and it's not automatically a guarantee that that just because the student doesn't receive accommodations, you're going to have a lot of recourse. But there is certainly the grievance process, and there could be training the professors. In the mental health area, I've asked for training at times, because sometimes professors will say things that are highly inappropriate. There's no anxiety allowed here. There's no panic attacks allowed in my classroom, which is really helpful.
Right. Yeah, it is super helpful. Why do so many of you have accommodations? We didn't have accommodations when I was a student.
I don't believe in it.
Yeah, I don't believe in accommodations. Can you get access to a student's grades?
If your student gives them to you and consents, so not automatically, no.
Okay.
If your student gives you the password to their portal, you can do it that way, but that's up to your student again. But you're not going to automatically have access.
Yeah,
My student's portal has. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I said, just because you're paying does not allow you to get access to the grades.
No. And my student's portal, incidentally, has like a double, like a two-step identification. So it's like, if he wasn't there, I wouldn't, I wouldn't be able to access it, even if I did have the password. So that is a little bit of a wrinkle. I have a question. Can a college tell you can't be on the same email as your child if you're in transition and you have conservatorship?
That's more of a question for you, Ali, maybe on the conservatorship. I'm not.
I mean, if the student is conserved, then I would think that the conservator would have access to the email, because they're supposed to be handling all of the matters. for that student. However, I don't understand the in transition. So maybe
Right.
they're not going to be conserved any
Well,
longer.
I think they might, might be referring to like a transition program,
Okay.
Marion, like in a transition program as opposed to a college type of situation.
Oh.
You know, like, I mean, I'm not sure. So the last question that I have from the audience, do colleges ask for a student's IEP or 504 as substantiation for requests for accommodations?
It's very helpful to have that, but if you don't have it, it doesn't mean that you won't get accommodations because you need that medical documentation, which is enough. And some students say they're in a private school, they won't have an IEP or 504, and they may still, but they may not. And you can still get accommodations through the, you do need some educational testing or medical documentation, but you don't have to have an IEP or 504.
Perfect. Well, thank you all so much for joining us, everybody on the panel, all of our friends in the audience. This was a tremendous discussion, and I learned a lot. I have like all these little notes scribbled here about things that I need to do that I haven't done that need to be done, you know, pretty much immediately, which is excellent for me always. But I really, really appreciate everybody sharing their expertise and their knowledge. And, you know, this is our last webinar of the year. So thank you to all of you who have joined us for this one and any other ones we have, we've done. We will be kicking off the webinar series in August. And of course, don't forget about the resources fair on October 1st, which will be opening up tomorrow. Thank you all so much for joining us. This webinar has been recorded and will be available on Facebook, on our Facebook page at SPED Legal Fund in the next couple of days and on our website eventually. So thank you so much, and everyone have a great night. Be well.
You too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.